In this episode, Darrell and I discuss some options you should avoid when trying to pivot your startup. And if you don't know who we are, Darrell and I were co-founders of a company called Realbase, which we recently sold for 180 million. I was CTO and Darrell's head of product. So let's jump into today's episode. All right. Hello, Darrell.
Hello. Welcome back to, I just checked on Spotify before and there are 4 followers on this podcast. So if you're one of those 4 people, shout outs to you. If you're hearing it for the first time, make sure you get a subscribe in.
Don't forget that we also have it on YouTube, bro. It's all right. We get
Yeah. There's some views there.
There's millions
But there's
there.
4 on Spotify.
Yeah, well, welcome to the 4 Spotify subscribers. All right. So today we are going to talk about an article by Andrew Chen titled Unfortunate Startup Pivots. This is quite an interesting article, actually. He talks, because he's an investor, so he is pretty big on that kind of thing. So what did he say here? Their program called Speed Run, where they invest $750K into each pre-seed/seed startup. That's pretty awesome. So maybe have a look at that if you ever need some funding. But anyway, so what he's talking about is, or just things he's seen from companies, I guess, that he works with, and the pivots that they make, and the ones that don't work in general. Generally don't work. So a quick outline of some of them that don't work that I got from the article was, I guess we can I'll bring it up and then we can have a chat through them. But the first one is going from B2B into consumer, so B2C. So obviously that's quite a hard one, because I guess we know that B2C is quite a challenge, especially if you don't have lots of advertising money, because getting the attention of a consumer is very difficult, and they generally, it's harder to sell to them because they don't usually have that like longevity. Like a business, if you sell them a tool or something or a service, they will stick around for a long time, and you don't have to keep trying to acquire.
Especially in the tech space, like people generally don't want to spend money on random things like a business does. I'm much more comfortable in the business space because it's a cost value equation. You're just like, this is worth this much money to you. I'm going to take a fraction of that and make your job easier. It's a very simple sort of transaction.
Yeah. Whereas with a consumer, they're generally looking to like purchase something once, or, like sometimes products can be repurchasable, consumables, but it's much harder to get them to actually know about your brand. It's harder to identify them. Like you can't just pick up a phone or you get their email. It's very difficult to do that. Whereas with B2B, you can actually identify your customers. Especially if you're working local, you can actually go and find those customers. You can go and talk to them. Oh no.
Sorry. I think I actually just took all my batteries inside. I'll come back in 1 sec. It's going to take me a couple of minutes. I got to run inside. Stupid.
Amrit, just make sure you cut this all out, please, sir. Thank you.
Have a look. There it is. Full battery.
All right, so
sorry. Righty, where
all
were
right,
we?
so what I was saying, I guess. Okay, so where were we? Let's just start from. I was saying
it's easier to find the customers.
Yeah. So with B2B, it's a lot easier to actually find and identify a customer, especially if you're local. You can actually go to that customer. it could be a physical location. You can go and meet them face to face. You can have, you can reach out with via their company website. You can go through all their kind of departments, but you actually have a target. You know who that is. You can put that person on the wall, that company on the wall, and work through it. Whereas B2C is so much harder. You have like a persona. You kind of know what you want, but to actually get them, probably going to be targeting social media, something like that. So it's a much harder thing to market to. So to pivot from B2B to B2C it does sound like a recipe for a disaster.
Yeah, I think they're probably also very different skill sets. Like people who are really good at e-commerce, people who are really good at running retail, things like that. It's a very different skill set finding those customers and like the branding, the marketing, all of that. So if you are pivoting from B2B to B2C, it's very unlikely that you have the skill set between the two and you would have to learn it. So you're completely changing your startup. You're not staying within like a confines of somewhere you're still familiar with.
Yeah, and especially because I think in B2B you'd have sales and stuff would be quite a big, strong part of that, whereas B2C gets a lot harder to do the same process. So those kind of skilled people, if you have them in your business, would struggle to thrive in that environment. The next one was adding chat, social, and notifications to your app when retention isn't good. So if you don't have people returning to your app, adding ways for them to socialize with the people that aren't there, probably not the best mechanism for success either. Look, I'm not going to pretend we haven't spoken about these kind of things before. For retention.
That's an interesting one because we actually talked about that for my 4x4. We were like, if we get that like habit forming thing of getting people come back, but it's good to know that that's not necessarily a good idea if you don't have good product market fit already.
Yeah. So I think with with my 4x4, you can see there is some sort of product market fit in the fact that it organically grows, which is nice. So It does have a product market fit there. And I guess the reason why we were looking at notifications was, especially in like a social app, because it is a social app already. It's not like we're adding social to it. It is a social app. So notifications, I think grouping those together can be a little bit interesting. I guess you could argue either way there. But if you're not social at all, trying to add social elements to it would be weird. I guess like Clipflow would be a good example. We start adding social elements. It's like, hey, you can chat to your other creators and stuff. Like if it's not grabbing, that's not going to be the thing that pushes across the line.
Yeah. Yeah, especially not when everyone wants to be social on specific platforms they're already on. They're not going to come over, and I don't want to do that on Clipflow.
Another one, this one's also a good one. This is very much on vogue at the moment, is chasing AI or Web3 or some other trendy tech, or whatever that is at the time. It's like, hey, your app is cool, but where's the AI features? Or let's add AI because that will really blow it up.
Yeah, why don't we have NFTs in Clipflow?
Yeah, the NFT, download your video and store it as an NFT forever. People can buy it. But like, yeah, I've seen this too many times. Like people just chasing the trendy thing at the time, going ham. Like definitely the blockchain was, 2 to 3 years ago. Again, something I was looking at, investigating, seeing, because it was all the rage. Everyone was talking about it. And it's like, well, how can you get in on that? And to be honest, it looks like it was a good thing that we didn't do that. But all of these things are pivots into these things. So like, obviously, if you are an AI app and that's your foundation, you're not pivoting into it. But if you're like, hey, my app, again, look, hey, Clipflow doesn't work. Let's pivot into adding AI. That's not going to make it work. That's not going to be.
I think any of these things are like, if these are the crutches you're relying on to get exposure and like use it as marketing, like we're Web3 now, guys, probably not the best idea. It's probably not your problem that you're not on the third web.
Yeah, third web. Because where's the
We're only on the second web, I don't know.
Yeah, haven't found that one yet. Yeah. Okay, so and this one is another interesting one is so he calls it premature platforms, but going more broad. So for instance, look, Clipflow doesn't work as a YouTuber project management platform. So what we do is we end up pulling back and saying, okay, well now it's a all social management platform. So instead of trying to focus on your niche, instead of doing what would actually be the right way, which is niching down, you go reverse. So you say, well, the niche isn't working, so I'm going to go backwards and go bigger. That generally shows that your product doesn't work at all. Because if you can't get it working for one niche, which is way more focused, how are you going to get it to work for a much broader audience?
Yep. And your marketing message has to be diluted and the product gets worse. Yeah.
Yeah. So that just sounds, again, they're chasing a rabbit hole of failure towards the failure goal. And then, yeah, this is a funny one. This is an interesting one. And look, it's funny. They're funny because we've thought about them all in the past. I guess all these things kind of go through your mind when you're building a business because you're always trying to figure out what's the easiest way to grow. But this one's great. It's going from paid to free. So, hey, no one wants to pay for my product, so I'm going to make it free. And that way I'm going to get heaps of users. Yes, guess what? You probably will get heaps of users, but they're free and you're never going to convert them into paid users. And you're now going to support them and make no money, but you're going to feel good because you had lots of users. And that's, again, a recipe.
Yeah, use that one with caution, I reckon, because that's unless, like, if you plan for it, like with my 4x4, we sort of planned for it. It has to be a free product, and there is the monetization in like marketing or advertising or whatever. You know that that's going to come later, and that's fine to be free up to that point. But if you've made something that you thought people would pay for, and then you have to make it free, people obviously didn't really like what you made.
Yeah, it wasn't a value. Yeah, there's a difference between obviously a free product where the user, as they say, is the is the product. The user is the product versus a paid product where you're trying to sell a service and you're like, oh, this doesn't work, so I'm going to now give it all away for free. And then how do you monetize that? I actually don't even know. So then it's kind of just a dead end. But yeah, going from free entry-level product to selling marketing or advertising is another way. You know, Facebook's a free product, sells advertising. So is Instagram. So is X, et cetera, et cetera. They're all free products that sell advertising. So yeah, look, those are things that he's found haven't worked. And I would say I probably agree that it would be hard for, to pivot into any of those and actually make them work. Be very rare.
Like, to me, they all scream desperation of like, we've got to try something. And I only say that because like I feel that too when you build something and you're like, it's not quite there yet. Maybe we should just open the floodgates and try and like make it accessible to more customers or give it away or whatever. Those are things that you definitely do think about.
Yeah. So we laugh, but it's only because we know that's exactly the way we've done and thought. So interesting, and he finishes off this article actually. He says some ways to think about pivots, right? So when you're actually building, when you want to pivot, and a pivot is kind of a move of desperation sometimes. It may be desperation, may not, but I think it's smart to pivot, and it may not be massive pivots. It could be small pivots, but it's important to think about what you're doing before you do it because it can be very expensive. You could do smaller pivots and smaller like little steps sideways to tune things in. Like we started Clipflow more of like, hey, we should think about all sorts of long form video content, but we actually ended up saying, nah, stuff that, let's niche down. And it's a small pivot into a more niched kind of customer, which it actually makes the product way better because then you don't have to have all these like weird generic terms. You can be very specific to what you're trying to make. But things that he says that you should think about. So number one, is the product working at all for any segment? And then it's like, could you build an entire product just for this group? Mm-hmm. Right. So I think that's super important. Like if you have quite a broad product and it's working for a specific user, just target that user. Alex Hormozi talks about the same thing. If you have a customer that really likes us, like it's your top 20%, what do they look like? And then just target them. Remove everyone else and just target that customer. And that's a very good way to grow a business and actually become very profitable.
It's also a good way to prioritize your software, make it much simpler.
Yeah, definitely. And then the next one was, are people having trouble understanding your product because it's a new market? So new markets are always tough. Like trying to invent a new market, that's like been there before, just disgustingly hard. Are there any existing product categories that are nearby? And then could you pivot into that and try to conform at least 70+% with a category customers understand, and then try and just innovate in a few places. Yep. So rather than being like way out there with a whole new concept, bring something that's similar to your concept and then add a little bit of innovation rather than trying to invent a whole new one. because that is very hard to do. Like, what are some examples? I guess one example that's happening right now is the whole VR, right? The glasses and all that stuff, trying to invent that whole category. If you're not Apple or Facebook, but you can even see them, they're falling flat on their face. They're trying to invent a new category and just not
as far as
succeeding.
like actual productivity beyond entertainment, there's not much useful stuff happening in that space. And the stuff that is good that's happening in that space is like very business to business. And we're talking like, I think is it Hewlett Packard that makes the wind turbines? They have like AR glasses that can train the person on site which things to plug in where, like it sees the switchboard and everything. Those sort of things are super useful. But anyone else trying to just say like, we do all of our stuff in VR, not on a screen, it's going to be very difficult to enter that market and tell people that this is a better way of doing it. Like if it's someone's job to do something in a certain way, they're going to implement and use those tools. I'm trying to convince anyone else like, hey, you should do it this way.
Exactly. We experienced this when we started doing real estate photography. It was before the invent of that, like being mainstream. Now every house has it, but we used to have to try and sell to people, and agents were like, "Nah, I just take it with my little handheld camera, and that's good enough." But to try and break into that market took years, and it was such hard work. And nowadays, you're like, "Hey, I'm a real estate photographer." Everyone's like, "Cool, how much do you cost?" And then because it just has to happen. So it's one of those kind of things. It makes your life a lot harder. Number 3 was, have you learned a secret about your market that now knowing what you know would make you start out differently? If you deleted all your code, fired your whole team, and started over with a fresh idea, what would that idea be? Should you just be doing that?
I like that one.
Yeah, except for the firing your whole team. Hopefully you haven't got a whole team.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, you're fired, Ken. Sorry. You're out.
Probably don't have a whole team before you actually get product market fit. It's probably a good idea.
Well,
and I think this is where
that's a whole conversation around
that's
funding
the whole
and what you do with your
conversation. We're going to
funding.
save that one for later. Put a pin in it. We already have one.
I like that one because it reminds me of, I think I read that Elon Musk said once, it could be Elon Musk, it could be someone else and he just stole it. I have no idea. He said, if you're not getting complaints from customers, you're not deleting enough code. So the idea was if you're not stripping back features and getting a lot of complaints that like, oh, that thing's gone, then you're not removing enough stuff, enough technical debt from your products.
Can't say I've ever been in that boat before. I've removed a few things, but never not that much. That's definitely an interesting one. But yeah, like what is the one core feature that's important? And it's hard, like, because when you're starting out and you have nothing. So this is obviously for people pivoting. So it's a little bit different. Like they've been going for a while and they're pivoting to something new. They've got a team, so they've been funded or something. But
it's people with customers, yeah.
Yeah. So when you have a business where you're starting out, you're just going to throw as much as you can at the wall, right? Because you want to see what actually sticks. Like we don't know. It's the same kind of thing in Clipflow right now. We're just building everything that we think is useful. And then in the end of the day, you can come back in a couple of years and say, oh, well, that's not used. Remove. But until that stage and you actually know what your core like killer feature is, you have to kind of do that. So it's a bit of that's a hard one. But I mean, this is exactly it, right? So if you've gone through, let's say 2 years of Clipflow, and then we figure out this is the killer feature, what could you remove and what could you focus on to make that killer feature the main thing that people do? And then everything else kind of just fades to the background. That's a good point.
I think if you've got the technical competence to build stuff, like for us, it's easier for us to build a feature and test it rather than put something out in the market like a survey, pay for people to complete the survey or market the products. Like we've obviously talked about with new features rolling out, doing landing pages and advertising to them. That's one way of testing. Actually building the feature or the idea and then feeling it out yourself is just another way of doing that.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And the final point that he thinks says we should think about is, are there any competitive products in your space that are successful? If you were to dramatically invert one feature of their product, but otherwise mostly try to fast follow them, what would the product look like? So yeah, I think this is one of the key things. Like this is where people say every idea is done. You can't do anything in startup world anymore. That's absolute nonsense. You can always do something better. That's exactly what we did. But you find someone who's doing really well, where their product is average, or you think looks average, and attack it. Do something better. Do it better. Do it faster.
Better, faster, cheaper.
Yeah, you just attack that, and that's a great way. But look, that's pivoting. So it's expensive to do when you're that big or when you are a certain size. But this is even for when you're starting out. I think this is a great way to figure out what you want to build. Is look at what someone else is doing. Is it killing it? If it is, what could be improved? Focus on improving those things, and then market, because the market's been proven already. I actually had a chat to someone on LinkedIn the other day just about like finding a market where it's already like being saturated with something, and then just go after that market. You can just be the other guy. It's a great way of getting your foot in the door.
Putting on my ClipFlow product hat as an example for this, like if I was to look at what's successful in the YouTube tool space, it's all idea generation, or like AI idea generation. vidIQ is successful, TubeBuddy is successful. All of these things they're in a different space. But then I would also just say, just because everyone's doing something well in that space doesn't mean that's exactly what you want to be doing. Like this would almost suggest like that we see that the idea generation with AI is the thing. We don't think that has as long a runway or a moat as we want to go after in a product. So we wouldn't just immediately do that. So there's also, I guess, the proviso there that just because everyone else is doing that doesn't mean it necessarily fits your long-term goals for your product.
And in the same vein, it's like we could also look at it a different way, and we can say, well, all product management tools do really well, right? Think about your Mondays, think about your Asana, think about your Jiras. They all do really well. So niching down. So what are we doing? We're niching down into one area. Look at Notion. We're niching down into one specific use case for that tool, and then going hard. So it's the same thing. Like you can look at it from multiple angles, but I think that's more what we did with ClipFlow, is where we said, well, these tools can do it, and project management is massive. So it's a proven industry now, and we know lots of YouTubers use Notion. So how do we make Notion better? So it's not trying to be Notion, because that's silly and it's enormous, but how do we make the tools that the YouTubers want from Notion better? And that's what we did, and that's how we started ClipFlow, right? So look at what someone's doing successfully, and then go after that market.
Yep.
And that's it. And he says, sometimes I know how to ask the questions, but don't have the answers. But those are a few places to start. So always ask the questions, and then find out the answers, and just keep moving forward.
Yeah. I guess, how do you find the answers? Just testing. Just try and keep testing as quick and cheap as possible. So if you have a hypothesis that you should be moving into another area, test it in a really light way, as cheaply as you can. Whether that's just asking people, going out there and asking people, or if it's dipping your toe into the water of that thing, as opposed to just going full, we're immediately going to pivot now.
Yeah, definitely. It's a tough place to be when you have to pivot, but also think if you just constantly monitor your product and see how it's fitting, and just be agile, you can make sure you keep steering the ship. There's always going to be changes, but we just have to make sure we're working in the right direction.